The Ford GT40 is a high-performance American-British endurance racing car, built and designed in England and in the United States, and powered by a series of American-built engines, which won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 4 consecutive times, from 1966 to 1969. In 1966, with Henry Ford II himself in attendance at Le Mans, the Mk II GT40 provided Ford with the first overall Le Mans victory for an American manufacturer and the first victory for an American manufacturer at a major European race since Jimmy Murphy's triumph with Duesenberg at the 1921 French Grand Prix. The Mk IV GT40, which won the race in 1967, remains, to this day, the only car designed and built entirely in the United States to claim an overall win at Le Mans. In addition to 4 consecutive overall Le Mans victories, Ford also won the following 4 FIA international titles with the GT40: 1966 International Manufacturers' Championship, over 2,000 cc's, 1966 International Championship for Sports Cars, Division 3, 1967 International Championship for Sports Cars, Division 3, 1968 International Championship for Makes. The GT40 was originally produced to win long-distance sports car races against Ferrari. Chassis P1075, which won in 1968 and 1969, is the first car in Le Mans history to win the race more than once with the same chassis, using a Ford engine originally of 4.7-litre displacement capacity, enlarged to 4.9-litre with special alloy Gurney's Lake cylinder head. The car was named the GT with the 40 representing its overall height of 40 inches as required by the rules. Large displacement Ford V8 engines were used, compared with a Ferrari V12 which displaced 3.0 litres or 4.0 litres. Early cars were simply named Ford GT. The name GT40 was the name of Ford's project to prepare the cars for the international endurance racing circuit, and the quest to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. The first 12 prototype vehicles carried serial numbers GT101 through GT112. The production began and the subsequent cars, the MKI, MKII, and MKIIS, were numbered GT40P/1000 through GT40P/1145, were officially GT40S. The name of Ford's project, and the serial numbers dispel the story that GT40 was only a nickname. The contemporary Ford GT is a modern homage to the GT40. History: Henry Ford II had wanted a Ford at Le Mans since the early 1960s. In the spring of 1963, Ford reportedly received word through a European intermediary that Enzo Ferrari was interested in selling to Ford Motor Company. Ford reportedly spent several $1 million in an audit of Ferrari factory assets and in legal negotiations, only to have Ferrari unilaterally cut off talks at a late stage due to disputes about the ability to direct open-wheel racing. Ferrari, who wanted to remain the sole operator of his company's motorsports division, was angered when he was told that he would not be allowed to race at the Indianapolis 500 if the deal went through, since Ford fielded Indy cars using the company's engine, and didn't want competition from Ferrari. Enzo cut the deal off out of spite, and Henry Ford II, enraged, directed his racing division to find a company that could build a Ferrari beater on the world endurance racing circuit. To this end Ford began negotiation with Lotus, Lola, and Cooper. Cooper had no experience in GT or prototype, and its performances in Formula One were declining. Lotus was already a Ford partner for their Indy 500 project. Ford executives already doubted the ability of Lotus to handle this new project. Colin Chapman probably had similar views, as he asked a high price for his contribution and insisted that the car should be named a Lotus Ford, an attitude that can be viewed as polite refusal. The Lola proposal was chosen, since Lola had used a Ford V8 engine in their mid-engined Lola Mk6. It was one of the most advanced racing cars of the time, and made a noted performance in Le Mans 1963, even though the car did not finish, due to low gearing and slow revving out on the Mulsanne straight. However, Eric Broadley, Lola car's owner and chief designer, agreed on a short-term personal contribution to the project without involving Lola cars. The agreement with Broadley included a one-year collaboration between Ford and Broadley, and the sale of the two Lola Mk6 chassis builds to Ford. To form the development team, Ford also hired the ex-Aston Martin team manager John Wyer. Ford Motor Company engineer Roy Lunn was sent to England. He had designed the mid-engined Mustang I concept car powered by a 1.7-litre V4. Despite the small engine of the Mustang I, Lunn was the only Dearborn engineer to have some experience with a mid-engined car. Overseen by Harley Kopp, the team of Broadley, Lunn and Wyer began working on the new car at the Lola factory in Bromley. At the end of 1963 the team moved to Slough, near Heathrow Airport. Ford then established Ford Advanced Vehicles Limited, a new subsidiary under the direction of Wyer, to manage the project. The first chassis built by Abbey Panels of Coventry was delivered on March 16, 1963, with fiberglass mouldings produced by Fiberglass Engineering Limited of Farnham. The first Ford GT, the GT/101, was unveiled in England on April 1 and soon after exhibited in New York. Purchase price of the completed car for competition use was £5,200. It was powered by the 4.2L Phelan engine with a Colotti transaxle. The same power plant was used by the Lola GT and the single-seater Lotus 29 that came in a highly controversial second at the Indy 500 in 1963. Racing history: the Ford GT40 was first raced in May 1964 at the NA1 Nürburgring 1,000 km race where it retired with suspension failure after holding second place early in the event. 3 weeks later at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, all three entries retired although the Ginther Gregory car led the field from the second lap until its first pit stop. After a season-long series of dismal results under John Wyer in 1964, the program was handed over to Carroll Shelby after the 1964 Nassau race. The cars were sent directly to Shelby, still bearing the dirt and damage from the Nassau race. Carroll Shelby was noted for complaining that the cars were poorly maintained when he received them, but later information revealed the cars were packed up as soon as the race was over, and FAV never had a chance to clean and organize the cars to be transported to Shelby. Shelby's first victory came on their maiden race with a Ford program, with Ken Miles and Lloyd Ruby taking a Shelby American entered GT40 to victory in the Daytona 2000 in February 1965. The rest of the season, however, was a disaster. The experience gained in 1964 and 1965 allowed the 7-litre Mk II to dominate the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in 1966 with a 1-2-3 result. The finish, however, was clouded in controversy. In the final few hours, the Ford GT of New Zealanders Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon closely trailed the leading Ford GT driven by Englishman Ken Miles and New Zealander Denny Hume. With a multi-million-dollar program finally on the very brink of success, Ford team officials faced a difficult choice. They could allow the drivers to settle the outcome by racing each other and risk one or both cars breaking down or crashing. They could dictate a finishing order to the drivers guaranteeing that one set of drivers would be extremely unhappy. Or they could arrange a tie, with the McLaren Amon and Miles Hume cars crossing the line side by side. The team chose the last and informed McLaren and Miles of the decision just before the two got in their cars for the final stint. Then, not long before the finish, the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, organizers of the Le Mans event, informed Ford that the geographical difference in starting positions would be taken into account at a close finish meaning that the McLaren Amon vehicle, which had started perhaps 60 feet behind the Hugh Miles car, would have covered slightly more ground over the 24 hours and would therefore be the winner. Secondly, Ford officials admitted later, the company's contentious relationship with Miles, its top contract driver, placed executives in a difficult position. They could reward an outstanding driver who had been at times extremely difficult to work with, or they could decide in favor of drivers with less commitment to the Ford program but who had been easier to deal with. Ford stuck with the orchestrated photo finish but Miles, deeply bitter over this decision after his dedication to the program, issued his own protest by suddenly slowing just yards from the finish and letting McLaren across the line first. Miles died in a testing accident in the J car at Riverside Raceway just 2 months later. Miles' death occurred at the wheel of the Ford J car, an iteration of the GT40 that included several unique features. These included an aluminum honeycomb chassis construction and a Briard-Van body design that experimented with camback aerodynamic theories. Unfortunately, the fatal Miles accident was attributed at least partly to the unproven aerodynamics of the J car design, as well as the experimental chassis strength. The team embarked on a complete redesign of the car, which became known as the Mk IV. The Mk IV, a newer design with the Mk II engine but a different chassis and a different body, won the following year at Le Mans, when 4 Mark IVs, 3 Mark IIs and 3 Mark Is raced. The high speeds achieved in that race caused a rule change, which already came in effect in 1968. The prototypes were limited to the capacity of to 3.0-litre, the same as in Formula One. This took out the V12-powered Ferrari 330p as well as the Chaparral and the Mk IV. If at least 50 cars had been built, sports cars like the GT40 and the Lola T70 were allowed, with a maximum of 5.0 L. John Wyer's revised 4.7-litre Mki won the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in 1968 against the fragile smaller prototypes. This result, added to 4 other round wins for the GT40, gave Ford victory in the 1968 International Championship for makes. The GT40's intended 3.0L replacement, the Ford P68, and Mirage cars proved a dismal failure. In 1969, facing more experienced prototypes in the new yet still unreliable 4.50L flat 12-powered Porsche 917s, the winners Jackie Oliver managed to beat the remaining 3.0-litre Porsche 908 by just a few seconds with the already outdated GT40. Apart from brake wear in the Porsche and the decision not to change pads so close to the race end, the winning combination was relaxed driving by both GT40 drivers and heroic efforts at the right time by ICKX, who won Le Mans 5 more times in later years. In 1970, the revised Porsche 917 dominated, and the GT40 had become obsolete. Versions, Mki. The Mki was the original Ford GT40. Early prototypes were powered by 4.2-litre alloy V8 engines and production models were powered by 4.7-litre engines as used in the Ford Mustang. 5 prototype models were built with roadster bodywork, including the Ford X1. The Mki was modified and run by John Wyer in 1968 and 1969, winning Le Mans in both those years and Sebring in 1969. The Mki and IV were both obsolete after the FIA had changed the rules to ban unlimited capacity engines. But the Mki, with its smaller engine, was legally able to race. X1 Roadster. The X1 was a roadster built to contest the fall 1965 North American Pro Series, a forerunner of Can-Am, entered by the Bruce McLaren team and driven by Chris Amon. The car had an aluminum chassis built at Abbey Panels and was originally powered by a 4.7-litre engine. The real purpose of this car was to test several improvements originating from Carcraft, Shelby and McLaren. Several gearboxes were used, a Hewland LG 500 and at least one automatic gearbox. It was later upgraded to Mk II specifications with a 7.0-litre engine and a standard 4-ratio Carcraft gearbox. However, the car kept specific features such as its open roof and lightweight aluminum chassis. The car went on to win the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1966. The X1 was a one-off and was later ordered to be destroyed by customs officials. Mk II. The Mki was very similar in appearance to the Mki, but it actually was a bit different from its predecessor. It used the 7.0-litre FE engine from the Ford Galaxy, which was an engine used in NASCAR at the time. The car's chassis was more or less the same as the British-built Mki chassis, but it and other parts of the car had to be redesigned and modified by Carroll Shelby's organization in order to accommodate the larger and heavier 427 engine. A new Carcraft-built 4-speed gearbox was built to handle the more powerful engine, replacing the ZF 5-speed used in the Mki. This car is sometimes referred to as the Ford Mk II. In 1966, the Mk II began dominating the world-famous 24 Hours of Le Mans race in France. In 1966 the Mk II took Europe by surprise and beat Ferrari to finish 1-2-3 in the standings. Ford GT40s went on to win the race for 4 consecutive years. For 1967, the Mk-IIs were upgraded to be spec. They had redesigned bodywork and twin carburetors for an additional 15 horsepower. A batch of wrongly heat-treated input shafts in the transaxles sidelined virtually every Ford in the race, however, and Ferrari won 1-2-3. The Mk-IBs were also used for Sebring and Le Mans that year, and also it won the Reims 12 Hours in France. For the Daytona 24 Hours, 2 Mk II models had their engines rebadged as Mercury engines. Mercury was a Ford Motor Company division at that time, and Mercury's 427 was exactly the same engine as Ford's with different logos. Ford saw a good opportunity to advertise that division of the company. Mk III. The Mk III was a road car only, of which 7 were built. The car had 4 headlamps, the rear part of the body was expanded to make room for luggage, the 4.7-litre engine was detuned to 335 bhp, the shocks were softened, the shift lever was moved to the center and the car was available with a steering wheel on the left side of the car. As the Mk III looked significantly different from the racing models, many customers interested in buying a GT40 for road use chose to buy a Mk that was available from Wire Limited. J-Car. In an effort to develop a car with better aerodynamics and lighter weight, it was decided to retain the 7-litre engine, but redesign the rest of the car and ditch the Mk-II chassis. In order to bring the car more in-house, and lessening partnership with English firms, Ford Advanced Vehicles was sold to John Wyer and the new car was designed by Ford Studios and produced by Ford's subsidiary Carcraft under Ed Hull. There was also a partnership with the Brunswick Aircraft Corporation for expertise on the novel use of honeycomb aluminium panels bonded together to form a lightweight but rigid tub. The car was designated as the J-Car, as it was constructed to meet the new Appendix J regulations which were introduced by the FIA in 1966. The first J-Car was completed in March, 1966 and set the fastest time at the Le Mans trials that year. The tub weighed only 86 lb, and the entire car weighed only 2,660 lb, 300 lb less than the Mk II. It was decided to run the Mk-IIs due to their proven reliability, however, and little or no development was done on the J-Car for the rest of the season. Following Le Mans, the development program for the J-Car was resumed, and a second car was built. During a test session at Riverside International Raceway in August 1966, with Ken Miles driving, the car suddenly went out of control at the end of Riverside's high-speed, 1-mile-long back straight. The honeycomb chassis did not live up to its design goal, shattering upon impact, bursting into flames and killing Miles. It was determined that the unique, flat-topped bread van aerodynamics of the car, lacking any sort of spoiler, were implicated in generating excess lift. Therefore a more conventional but significantly more aerodynamic body was designed for the subsequent development of the J-Car, which was officially known as the GT40 Mk IV. A total of 9 cars were constructed with J-Car chassis numbers, although 6 were designated as Mk-IVs and 1 as the G7A. Mk IV. The Mk IV was built around a reinforced J chassis powered by the same 7.0L engine as the Mk II. Excluding the engine, gearbox, some suspension parts and the brakes from the Mk-II, the Mk-IV was totally different from other GT40s, using a specific chassis and specific bodywork. It was undoubtedly the most radical and American variant of all the GT40s over the years. As a direct result of the Miles accident, the team installed a NASCAR-style steel tube roll cage in the Mk-IV, which made it much safer, but the roll cage was so heavy that it negated most of the weight saving of the then highly advanced, radically innovative honeycomb panel construction. A 2-speed automatic gearbox was tried, but during the extensive testing of the J-Car in 1966 and 1967, it was decided that the 4-speed from the Mk would be retained. Dan Gurney often complained about the weight of the Mk IV, since the car was 600 pounds heavier than the Ferrari 330 P4s. During practice at Le Mans in 1967, in an effort to preserve the highly stressed brakes, Gurney developed a strategy of backing completely off the throttle several hundred yards before the approach to the Mulsanne hairpin and virtually coasting into the braking area. This technique saved the brakes, but the resulting increase in the car's recorded lap times during practice led to speculation within the Ford team that Gurney and Foyt, in an effort to compromise on chassis settings, had hopelessly dialed out their car. The Mk IV ran in only 2 races, the 1967 12 Hours of Sebring and the 1967 24 Hours of Le Mans, and won both events. Only one Mk IV was completed for Sebring. The pressure from Ford had been amped up considerably after Ford's humiliation at Daytona 2 months earlier. Mario Andretti and Bruce McLaren won Sebring, Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt won Le Mans, where the Ford representing Shelby American and Holman and Moody teams showed up to Le Mans with 2 Mk IVs each. The installation of the roll cage was ultimately credited by many with saving the life of Andretti, who crashed violently at the S's during the 1967 Le Mans 24 Hours, but escaped with minor injuries. Unlike the earlier Mk III cars, which were built in England, the Mk IVs were built in America by Carcraft. Le Mans 1967 remains the only truly all-American victory in Le Mans history. American drivers, team, chassis, engine and tires. A total of 6 Mk IVs were constructed. One of the Mk IVs was rebuilt to the Ford G7 in 1968, and used in the Can-Am series for 1969 and 1970, but with no success. This car is sometimes referred to as the Ford Mk IV. Continuation models, replicas and modernizations. As the price and the rarity of the Ford GT40 have increased, so has the demand for more cost-effective replications. As a result, several kit cars and replicas inspired by the Ford GT40 have come and gone over the years. Clones such as these are of varying quality and are generally intended for assembly by the enthusiast in a home workshop or garage. There are 2 alternatives to the kit car approach, namely continuation models and modernizations. GT40 per ranking competition, United States, authentic GT40 built by Superformance and co-designed with Pathfinder Motorsports, it is the only race version continuation model fully licensed by Ford GT40 spares. These carry continuation chassis numbers from the original cars. Approved for vintage racing by the historic Sportscar Racing Association, Bobby Rahal's Legends of Motorsports, and the Sportscar Vintage Racing Association, it is distributed by Pathfinder Motorsports. A GT40 per ranking campaigned by Pathfinder Motorsports with an engine built by Holman Moody won both the 2009 U.S. Vintage Grand Prix and the 2009 Governor's Cup at Watkins Glen. CAV GT, originally designed as a kit car, the CAV GT has evolved into a factory-built modernization with a focus on quality, usability and ergonomics. The CAV GT is known for its proprietary stainless steel monocoque chassis, developed by Autofutura, and offers superior driving dynamics to the original car by virtue of improved power-to-weight ratio and torsional rigidity. The CAV GT also possesses improved driving dynamics on the road. The stainless steel monocoque affords the driver additional interior space, and the CAV GT can accommodate drivers up to 6'4" inches who would otherwise not be able to drive a GT40. Additional upgraded components include custom-designed wishbones, shock absorbers and suspension uprights. The CAV GT is widely regarded as the best GT40 modernization in the world by virtue of the vehicle's quality and detailing. Holman Moody, GT40 Mark II's 1/3 at Le Mans in 1966, still manufacture a small number of GT40s from 1966 blueprints, Ford GT. At the 1995 Detroit Auto Show, the Ford GT90 concept was shown, and at the 2002 show, a new GT40 concept was unveiled by Ford. While similar in appearance to the original cars, it was bigger, wider, and 3 inches taller than the original 40 inches. 3 production prototype cars were shown in 2003 as part of Ford's centenary, and delivery of the production Ford GT began in the fall of 2004. The Ford GT was assembled in the Ford Exxon plant and painted by Saleen, Incorporated at their Saleen Special Vehicles plant in Troy, Michigan, USA. A British company, Safer Engineering, who made continuation GT40s in the 1980s, owned the GT40 trademark at that time, and when they completed production, they sold the excess parts, tooling, design, and trademark to a small American company called Ford GT40 Spares based in Ohio. Ford GT40 Spares licensed the use of the GT40 trademark to Ford for the initial 2002 show car, but when Ford decided to make the production vehicle, negotiations between the two failed, and as a result the new Ford GT does not wear the badge GT40. Ford GT40 Spares asked $40 million for the rights, which Ford declined. Bob Wood, one of 3 partners who owns Ford GT40 Spares, said, "When we talked with Ford, they asked what we wanted. We said that Ford owns Beanstalk in New York, the company that licenses the blue oval for Ford on such things as T-shirts. Since Beanstalk gets 7.5% of the retail cost of the item for licensing the name, we suggested 7.5% on each GT40 sold. At the then estimated $125,000 per copy, 7.5% of 4,500 vehicles would have totaled approximately $42,187,500. Later models or prototypes have also been called the Ford GT but have had different numbering on them, such as the Ford GT90 or the Ford GT70. The GT40 name is currently licensed to Hi-Tech Automotive in South Africa, the manufacturer who builds Superformance. Le Mans 24-hour victories. See also, Ford Supervan, a van-bodied variant, bundle of snakes, characteristic exhaust system, Colotti transmission of the initial, and early models, references. Further reading, Auto Passion Na Degree 49 July 1991, La Revue de l'Automobile Historique Na Degree 7 on March-April 2001, Ford. The Dust and the Glory: A Motor Racing History by Leo Levine/1968 Ford vs Ferrari, The Battle for Le Mans by Anthony Pritchard, 1984 Zuma Marketing, Ford GT40, An Individual History and Race Record by Ronnie Spain 1986, external links.